Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this fourth video of the playlist, we'll talk about Freud's thoughts on mass suggestion and libido. So grab your coffee and let's begin. We started out from the basic fact that an individual within a mass experiences, as a result of the influence of the mass, what is often a far-reaching change in his mental activity. His affectivity is extraordinarily enhanced, while his intellectual performance is noticeably reduced, both processes clearly tending towards an increasing resemblance to the other individuals in the mass. A result that can be achieved only through a lifting of the inhibitions peculiar to each individual, and through that individual renouncing his special structures of inclination. We have heard that these often unwanted effects are at least partially held back by a superior organization on the part of masses. But the basic fact of mass psychology, namely the two propositions of affect enhancement and thought inhibition in the primitive mass, is not contradicted thereby. What interests us, though, is finding the psychological explanation for this mental transformation of the individual within the mass. Rational factors, such as the intimidation of the individual mentioned above, i.e. the action of the individual's self-preservation drive, clearly fail to cover the phenomena to be observed. What we are offered otherwise as an explanation by authors in the fields of sociology and mass psychology is always the same, albeit under different names. The magic word suggestion. Tarde called it imitation, but we have to agree with the author who tells us that Tarde's imitation comes under the heading of suggestion, being in fact a consequence thereof. With Le Bon, everything alienating in social phenomena is attributed to two factors: reciprocal suggestion by individuals and the prestige of leaders. However, prestige in turn finds expression only in its effect, which is to evoke suggestion. With McDougall, we were able momentarily to gain the impression that his principle of primary affective induction made the assumption of suggestion dispensable. On further consideration, however, we have to recognize that this principle is no different in what it says than the familiar assertions of imitation or contagion. It simply lays greater stress on the affective factor. There is no doubt that such a tendency does exist in us, namely that of succumbing to a particular affect when we become aware of a sign of that affective state in someone else. But how many times do we successfully resist it, repudiating the effect, often reacting in the diametrically opposite fashion? So, why do we regularly surrender to that contagion in the mass? Again, we shall have to say, it is the suggestive influence of the mass compelling us to obey this imitative tendency that induces the affect within us. Actually, even apart from this, there is no getting round suggestion in McDougall. The message we hear from him, as from others, is masses are distinguished by a special suggestibility. This paves the way for the statement that suggestion, more correctly suggestibility, is in fact something fundamental, something irreducible, a basic fact of human mental life. Such was the view taken by Bernheim too, whose astonishing skills I witnessed personally in 1889. However, I remember a vague hostility to this tyranny of suggestion even then. If a patient who was not proving submissive was told forcefully, "But what are you doing? You are counter-suggestioning yourself," I said to myself that this was a clear case of injustice and an act of violence. The man, I felt, had every right to counter-suggestions if an attempt is being made to subjugate him with suggestions. My resistance subsequently took the form of a rebellion against allowing suggestion, which explained everything, to evade explanation itself. In this connection, I recalled the old riddle: Christopher bore Christ, but Christ carried the world. So tell me, what was Christopher standing on at the time? Approaching the vexed question of suggestion again, after avoiding it for some 30 years, I find that nothing has changed. In saying which, I am in fact able to make one exception, which, as it happens, reveals the influence of psychoanalysis. I see that especial efforts have been made to formulate the concept of suggestion correctly, that is to say, to establish conventions for the use of the term. Nor are such efforts redundant, because the word is moving in the direction of an ever wider application with a looser and looser connotation. Soon it will denote the exerting of any influence whatever, as it does in English, where to suggest covers a range of meanings from communicating an idea to stimulating a reaction. However, as regards the essence of suggestion, i.e., the conditions under which influence is exerted for no adequate logical reason, no explanation has been produced. I should not be afraid to back up this assertion by analyzing the literature of the past 30 years. The reason why I refrain from doing so is that I know a thorough study, setting itself just such a task, is already in preparation in my vicinity. Instead, I shall try to shed some light on mass psychology by using the term libido, which has served us so well in our study of psychoneuroses. Libido is an expression from affectivity theory. It is how we refer to the energy, considered as a quantitative value, albeit currently an unmeasurable one, of those drives having to do with everything that can be brought together under the heading of love. The core of what we call love is, of course, what is generally known as love, and poets sing of, namely, sexual love with the goal of sexual union. However, we do not separate off from that the other things that share the name of love. Self-love on the one hand, and on the other hand, parental and infant love, friendship, general love of humanity, and even dedication to concrete objects, as well as to abstract ideas. Our justification is that psychoanalytic investigation has taught us that all these urges are expressions of the same drive impulses as push the sexes in the direction of sexual union. And though in other circumstances they may be pushed away from that sexual goal or stayed in its achievement, nevertheless they always preserve enough of their original essence for their identity to remain recognizable, self-sacrifice, striving for greater closeness. We feel, then, that with the word love in its multiple applications, language has effected a wholly justified synopsis, and that we cannot do better than place our scientific discussions and descriptions on the same foundation. By taking that decision, psychoanalysis unleashed a storm of indignation, as if it had been guilty of some wanton innovation. Yet with this extended conception of love, psychoanalysis was doing nothing original. The philosopher Plato's Eros coincides perfectly, in its origin, action, and relationship to sexual love, with the libido of psychoanalysis, as Nachmanson and Pfister have shown in detail. And if the Apostle Paul prized love above all else in his famous first letter to the Corinthians, he undoubtedly understood it in the same extended sense, which just goes to show that people do not always take their great thinkers seriously, even when they profess great admiration for them. In psychoanalysis, these love drives are referred to as sexual drives. Most educated people, finding this choice of name offensive, have taken their revenge by saddling psychoanalysis with the charge of pansexualism. Anyone who regards sexuality as something shameful and degrading to human nature is, of course, at liberty to use the more genteel expressions Eros and eroticism. I could have done so myself from the outset and spared myself much opposition as a result. However, I chose not to, being keen to avoid concessions to feeble-heartedness. There is no knowing where such an avenue will lead. One gives way over words at first, and then little by little in deed as well. I cannot see that anything is gained by being ashamed of sexuality. After all, the Greek word eros, which apparently softens the offense, is quite simply the translation of our German word Liebe, and ultimately the man who can wait need make no concessions. So we shall try adopting the premise that love relationships, to use an inert expression, emotional ties, also form part of the essence of the mass mind. Let us remember that the existing literature makes no mention of them. In it, what would constitute their equivalent is obviously hidden from view behind the folding screen of suggestion. We base our expectation initially on two brief thoughts. First, that the mass is obviously held together by some kind of force. But to what force could such an achievement be better ascribed than to Eros, which holds the whole world together? Second, that the impression given when the individual surrenders his uniqueness in the mass and admits the influence of others is that he does so because of an inherent need to be in agreement with those others, rather than in opposition to them. So he may in fact be doing it for their sake. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check the books available in our link in the description. There you'll find many fundamental marketing books in different languages. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more psychology-related content. See you in the next one.